I'd like to tell you that, I hurt my back, deadlifting 500 pounds or, playing in the US Open finals, but none of that happened. So I remember this very distinctly. I'd kind of stayed away from the gym a little bit and started to get back into it slowly. So one day after one of those workouts, I woke up the next morning. I didn't feel any worse than I normally did after, a hard workout, and was getting ready for work. And I went to bend over to put on my pants, and I felt, and I swear I heard this pop. And it wasn't extremely painful at that time, but I felt something wasn't right. I twisted my back in a weird way. It just didn't feel like something I'd ever felt before. I grew up as a pretty high-ranked junior tennis player, and I, as part of tennis, we, did a lot of high velocity rotation, a lot of serves, etc. And so I kind of grew up feeling like my body moved pretty well. I always felt like I was pretty flexible, pretty mobile. But granted, that was, when I was in my teenage years, in my 20s, and in my 30s, I wouldn't exercise quite as often or as regularly, but I would go through phases where, let's say I wanted to get back out on the tennis courts or whatnot, and invariably I would be able to build up pretty well and go, play at a, moderately okay level. And usually my body responded fine to that. But always, kind of throughout my 30s, I managed to abuse my body sometimes, but then come out on the other end okay. My 40s was a little bit more humbling. So after I hurt myself bending over, I didn't think much of it. I was like, oh, well, that wasn't great, but I managed to, get in the car and go to work. And I was in clinic that day. So I was sitting down, standing, and over the course of the next, I would say 3 to 4 hours, I just began to develop intense low back spasms to the point where I was just so uncomfortable even sitting or standing or moving. The last patient of the day that day couldn't come soon enough. And I remember really distinctly, like, as I was listening to the last patient of the day, I was like, okay, like let's get to the point. Let's hurry up because I got to get out of here. And I, told my coordinator, I was like, hey, look, I got to go, and walked out, barely made it to the car. Um, my back was just cramping up like crazy. I managed to drive myself home, and as soon as I got home, I just laid down in bed. And my wife came home and she asked me, "Are you okay? I've never seen you like this." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know. I you know pulled something in my back, and now I'm in a lot of pain." And so the next day I woke up and I literally could not get out of bed. I had to like roll out of bed. I started Googling on my phone, and I'm a neurosurgeon, but I started Googling on my phone, like, what's going on. Luckily, I didn't have a lot of leg pain or any leg weakness or numbness, so I knew it wasn't something that I needed to get evaluated urgently. But that was the first day where I actually called in and I said, and I actually had to cancel surgery. In 15 years of practice, I'd never done that. But I just simply couldn't do it. And so I called my office and said, hey, look, we have to reschedule this surgery. And they were surprised because over, the whole time they had known me, I'd never done that. Um, and slowly over, a couple days, the spasms got better. I was able to move around, and I had sort of assumed at that point, well, I pulled a muscle, I walked it off after a few days. It was bad, but I just assumed I was kind of done with that. But what I found was over the course of the next 6 weeks to 3 months, I had a lot of ups and downs. I mean, there were certain days where I felt good. There were certain days I felt not so good. One of the big mistakes I made is a couple weeks after this incident, I tried to get back to lifting, and I remember doing something called a Bulgarian split squat, where I had my leg up on a bench and I was doing a squat, And I just, again, I felt a little twinge, and I stopped. Luckily, I stopped. But the next day, I was again in a lot of pain. I managed to make it to work, but it was, not pretty. Um, Over the course of, the next few weeks after that, I, started getting better, and I almost was scared to do anything, to the point where all I would do was walk. And so then I started, kind of searching on my phone, even using AI to kind of figure out, well, what should I do next? I even managed to get a full body MRI just to make sure nothing serious was what was going on. And what was really amazing is I looked at the MRI, and there's nothing really that bad. Nothing to, I had a little bit of degenerative change in my discs, but nothing, massively, terrible that needed urgent surgery or anything like that. And I was just amazed that the um, image didn't represent my experience. And so, that kind of got me thinking. And one of the problems, as surgeons, is we evaluate things on MRI, and MRI is always a static image, right? So people are lying down, and you get the MRI, and it's good in some ways because you can see major things going on. You can see bad herniated discs or nerve compression, and so it does give us a runway for things that need urgent surgery. But the thing it's not good at is showing, well, how do things move? Is there inflammation going on? What's your mobility like? And those things you can only really figure out by sort of working on it and doing a pretty detailed mobility screen. And so it really opened my eyes that in a lot of ways, us as surgeons, we're missing a big part of what gives people back pain. The other part that was really instructive for me was kind of how long it took me to feel better. For me, it this happened a little over a year ago, and it took a good 6 months before I felt comfortable getting back even to, reasonably like high velocity activities. And even now, I'm very careful to warm up, to do mobility and whatnot. So it really changed my frame of reference. Part of the reason I want to bring that up is a lot of times, we in surgery, we talk about really like specific time frames, like, a herniated disc gets better in 6 weeks or 3 months, or, we throw out some of these terms. And sure, the acute pain period for me only lasted a few days, but the vulnerability and the fragility of my spine still exists today. I haven't pushed it, but it really did take about 6 months to a year before I felt even confident doing, some of the basic stuff. And even now, I definitely, when I go play tennis, I don't play 110%, right? I warm up. I you know keep my competitive spirit down. I've had to modify some of the things I do with golf, and so it really opened my eyes to, you know, what what we need to do as we get older, the sort of ongoing maintenance of our body. And with my story, what was really, surprising to me is how little it really took to push me over the edge. And there wasn't anything special about the way I bent over and put on my pants that day. I didn't have heavier pants or, do some, really acrobatic move to get my pants on. But what I realized was the cumulative dysfunction of mobility and the cumulative stress on my body was what made me vulnerable to that sort of injury. And so sometimes you don't see what you're doing to your body until you have an acute injury. And it's always easy to say, well, be more proactive, but this really kind of brought it home for me. And it also kind of made me realize that I really think that the game as you get older is maintaining your mobility, maintaining muscle strength, all the while not destroying your joints. Because I definitely see people in two categories. One are people who, have great joints on MRI, but they don't move, they don't have much muscle, maybe they're sarcopenic, and over time they lose their mobility because their muscular structure isn't developed. But on the other hand, I also have patients who, go to the gym every day. Maybe they do CrossFit, maybe they are former athletes, and their muscular structure is all there, but their mobility is hampered by the fact that their joints are worn out, whether it's their back, their knees, their hips. And with knees and hips, there's reasonable ways to replace those joints. With the spine, unfortunately, there isn't. And we can put out big fires, if you have spinal cord compression or a nerves compressed, surgery is very good. But just kind of doing a spine replacement or spine transplant is just not feasible. In any case, once this all happened, it sort of changed my philosophy about how I approach patients and the types of things I talked with them about. And I felt like having this experience myself gave me a better lens to do it. So if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them below. And thanks for listening.